everybody, to the Design in the Age of Experience event. I'm here, I have the pleasure to introduce Morphosis this morning. With me is Corinza Harris, one of the designers and realizers behind the interfaces installation that you see here behind us. I also have, and I need help with this, Alessio Grancini. He's in charge of the AR and VR in Morphosis, the architecture firm. And Eric Mayer, who's a part of the X-Tech team for the advanced digital fabrication at Morphosis, and another one of the designers behind the interfaces installation. Today I'm going to keep the introduction short because there's a lot to talk about. So I'm going to hand it over to Corinza, the Director of Design Technology. I'm going to hand it over to Eric, the designer behind the interfaces installation, and he's going to give us an introduction to the Morphosis studio and the thought process behind the creation that you see here and right behind us. So, Eric?
Great, Jonathan. Thank you very much for the introduction. Welcome, everybody, to day 3 at the Design for the Age of Experience event. I'm excited to present interfaces to you today, the project that's gone through a process of design and development over the past 6 months. We've been working with Dassault Systèmes as well as the fabrication agency to pull this off. I want to talk today a little bit about the way that we conceived the installation, what the design intent is. I'll talk a little bit about the Morphosis Design Studio, how X-Tech, our fabrication studio, fits into the bigger agenda of the office, and go over a few design research projects that we've executed at several different scales. So interfaces, the installation behind you, is essentially conceived of as a contemporary contemplation space for visitors to engage the Morphosis design process. So what we've done is we've structured 3 rotating panels that operate as information feeds. These information feeds display design geometry, information, texture, color that is directly pulled from Morphosis digital projects that we work on in the computer. So what we're creating in this installation is a way for the visitor to engage digital content in a way that promotes impromptu alignments or adding the human element back into the digital environment, where we're promoting a kind of alternative reading of digital design space that promotes new ways of thinking about space. So there are essentially 3 projects that constitute the design language used in the interfaces installation. 3 built projects by Morphosis, including the Perot Museum of Nature and Science in Dallas, Texas, the Cologne One and Only Tower in Seoul, Korea, as well as the Bloomberg Center on Roosevelt Island in New York. So geometry from these 3 projects is made visible. The process of the design is made visible in the installation. Second to this installation, and actually integral to it, is an augmented reality application that Alessio here on our team has helped develop. So he's going to give a quick talk about that.
So yeah, thank you, Eric. The augmented reality application offers just a template for expanding the main concept of the interface installation. As Eric mentioned previously, there are these flat panels that work as data feed, like placeholders for any kind of data that you're projecting on it. So augmented reality in itself, it's something that allows you to locate information in the space that you can anchor and are around you. So it's kind of getting into this new shift that is going from physical to virtual in architectural space. We passed a lot of time on software before to actually arrive to the point to building something physically, and we want to visualize it, but we also want to locate a lot of information in the space and having a sort of hierarchy that help us to understand space through different levels. So this augmented reality application is just a template for initializing this process.
Okay, so I'll talk a little bit more about Morphosis as a design studio and X-Tech, our fabrication and material research division that works inside of Morphosis. Maybe the most important thing about Morphosis is that it's been around for over 40 years, And it's been through the digital turn, so to speak, where Morphosis operated in a physical world, producing architecture using drawings. Today, drawings are still a part of the process, but we're using software much differently today. And we're hoping to, in some ways, change the industry in the way that documentation and contracts are established at the beginning of projects, such that cumbersome drawing sets are not necessarily a part of the design and approval process. So X-Tech is part of Morphosis. We have 50 employees at Morphosis in Los Angeles, 4 of which operate in X-Tech, which is a fabrication studio, approximately 2,000 square feet, where we have CNC routers, 3D printers, a full analog wood facility for producing wood products. We can do metalworking. Essentially a studio that's dedicated to exploring materials at an architectural scale. We also have a robust internship program at our office, so we're pulling candidates from all over the world to come to our office and learn about the design process using their hands. So many times interns will visit the Morphosis studio for a period of 6 to 9 months with very little prior experience about fabrication. We engage them in a process that requires considerations about materiality and connection and detailing that supports their career as architects in the future. This process begins with building models. So the model making process at Morphosis has been established, well, it was established many years ago, but we've developed and refined a technique such that we're now manufacturing models. They're produced digitally in the computer, modeled, 3D printed, and then worked on by hand to produce the desired level of finish. Many of these are presentation models, but a lot of them are study models. So here are a series of examples that demonstrate the range of scales that we work on. And more recently, we've started to scale up our operation. So instead of working on just models, we're actually building full-scale components, which then translate into informed design decisions about actual architectural projects and scale decisions that inform the way the building is actually put together. A part of our studio is also interested in urban organizations and urban models. These are a different type of scale of model that, again, are worked on digitally and by hand at the same time. And so here are some other urban tower projects that we've worked on. Tom Main is the design director of the office, and he has a very particular sensibility to built objects. The office is organized very non-hierarchically, and the fabrication studio is located adjacent to the main conference space, which is adjacent to the main studio space, which essentially means that from any place in the office, whether you're having a meeting, whether you're working on a model, or whether you're having a design conversation with Tom, you have full visibility of all of the different types of activities that are going on in the office. But fabrication is at the kind of core of that. So several strategies that we use for generating form and organizing space would be developing a procedural approach to form making, where instead of the architect using their hand to make a gesture of a design decision or a design direction, Tom asks that we approach form at a procedural level. And so this is something that software has really helped us do over the years, where we're able to produce multiple iterations of similar systems organized in different ways to produce new readings that we as humans wouldn't necessarily be able to do individually with our own thought process. So in this sense, design technology is really supporting how form is organized, and it's augmenting our decision-making process. We're still, as humans, we're still the ones making the discernation between a quality product and something that is non-desirable, but the computer is there to just support a rapid iteration of design process. Again, I stressed this in the talk yesterday, but these are still handmade. At the end of the day, whether it's a model, whether it's a prototype, whether it's a building, there's a hand that's involved in the process at every step of the way. So I talked a little bit about this already, but willfulness and chance, it's the idea that you can set out a series of systems and learn from those systems in your decision-making process. So one project that I'll talk about today a little bit more specifically than this other stuff is called the No House, and this is actually Tom Main's personal residence that we built a couple years ago. It operates as a new housing typology in Los Angeles, where instead of becoming an icon of the neighborhood, the house is sunken into the earth, and the landscape becomes more prevalent than the architecture from the street. So our role began in this process by designing the project and building models with Tom directly. Tom and his wife Blythe were very interested in building working models. So this model was built very early and modified and adapted at every design decision and served as a unique record of the design process. We also worked on prototypes of various interior finishes that ended up becoming the final built work. And so we're essentially establishing a Douglas fir ceiling panel system that has no regular panels. All the panels are the same size, but they're all completely different. And so for us, as a fabrication shop, it doesn't make a lot of sense to build something that's completely unique, but we're actually able to do it just as efficiently as if we were doing the same thing, the same panel, repeatedly. So in this sense, every panel is different, but it doesn't add any time to the process, essentially, because we're still CNC machining every panel individually. Every panel is given a tag and then taken to the site in a strategic way, so the contractors that are on site doing the install know exactly which panels they need to hang at what time. So we're really trying to take control over the entire design for delivery process in this sense. So here are a few images of the ceiling panel being installed. Light fixtures extend through the holes, as well as fire sprinklers. There's a moment where the ceiling actually wraps and turns into the headboard for the master suite or the loft in the space. And so in this project, the digital geometry, what we're using to design the form, is essentially identical to the fabrication drawings, which is identical to what it looks like when it's actually built. So the gap between the digital model and the physical product is becoming much more narrow in our design process today. So here you see the same rib structure installed and being clad with the Douglas fir panels. And here is a shot of the house. The master suite is on top of the loft in the space above there. Our studio is also working on prototypes and various other material investigations. So in many cases, we understand there to be architectural materials that exist in the world that we don't have expertise in. So we make an effort to learn about these things and to explore them. So this is a project where we examined a tile system. We started with a tile unit that we wanted to implement terracotta as a material for. And so the process began with several design iterations of tile geometries and ways of attaching tiles to a particular substrate that was standardized by the terracotta installer or terracotta fabricator. The particular interest here was transitioning from a typical rain screen system to a brise-soleil system. And so that's something that you wouldn't necessarily see as a standard typology, where we're combining two different architectural attachment details to achieve a more interesting effect. And so the units were all parametric and built using the 3D Experience platform. We then gave the files to the fabricator to prototype. And we had a few different versions of this produced that were able to test different terracotta glazing finishes as well as materiality decisions. So the panel on the right has more of a coarse texture to it, whereas the other ones have a more satin or matte finish. Essentially serving as information for future projects. Now at this point we're building a library of information, so we can refer to this when we're designing future projects. I'll talk a little bit about a lamp project that we built for Tom Main. This is a solid surface lamp that exists in his house now. We've actually finally installed this about 2 weeks ago in his house. It was a prototype, actually our first solid surface project where we thermoformed solid surface material into a specific shape that was designed in the computer. And so a part of this process involved developing a jig that was exactly the right dimension, the right size that we needed to thermoform the panels to, and then building another jig for hanging the chandelier. So once the two sides of the chandelier are formed and correctly fitted to the jig, they're then suspended and then clad on the sides with another pattern. This is more of a detail shot of the side of the chandelier. And then installed, we've clad the outside of it with a polycarbonate that diffuses the light further. At this scale, the chandelier operates much less like an object in the space. So when you visit chandeliers, I encourage you to consider how the chandelier works in the space. In this sense, the object is acting architecturally because it's beyond the person in its scale, and it engages the space at multiple levels of occupancy. So you can exist, or you can inhabit the top floor, the loft, and experience the chandelier in a different way than you would at the kitchen dining area. Okay, so the last project that I'll talk about is a recent project that we completed for a separate architect. This is a different type of working methodology in our office that we've recently explored, where instead of building only Morphosis designs, we're actually interested in supporting other architecture offices in Los Angeles to design and resolve their material decisions for delivery, for project delivery. So in this sense, the client was an architect. They approached us essentially with an idea of a suspended aluminum ceiling grid, or ceiling system, and we looked at them and said, okay, you want to achieve a 3-inch thick, solid aluminum block ceiling. No installer is going to do this. This is kind of a crazy idea. You're looking at panels that are weighing hundreds of pounds. So we proposed a different system. We said, yeah, we will bid on your work, but we would do it this way. And so our role became more design assist in the sense that we developed a lightweight, unitized system that was all based in the digital model. Unfortunately, we still provided drawings that were contractual. So that's still very much a part of the design process where we build a drawing set that the contractors use that include contractual obligations so that are very specifically laid out. So our ambition for this project would be to forego a drawing set altogether because the digital model essentially contains all of the information that's needed. And the drawings become merely a representation of the digital model. In terms of economy, we were able to get 15 blocks per sheet of aluminum composite. Those blocks are folded into panels that can be worked on by one person. This is important because then you have another couple people that are assembling those into the unitized panels. So while one person is running the CNC router, another person with his friend is combining these into unitized panels, which are then given a tag. They're given a number based on where they go. This project was located across the street from our office, so we were able to hand deliver the panels. And the installation went extremely smoothly because these panels are so lightweight and they all fit together exactly the way that we designed in the computer. The installation process took less than 10 days in total. And so here's a shot of the pizza. It's, in case you guys are familiar, it's a Brooklyn-based pizzeria just opened in Los Angeles. They're called Roberta's. They're a really well-known Brooklyn pizza place. And the rumor always was that the reason New York pizza was better than Los Angeles pizza was because of the water. Los Angeles is known for terrible water quality. But I can tell you that's not the case. The pizza here is quite good. And if you're ever in Los Angeles, I recommend coming by the Roberta's restaurant. So, Carenza Harris here, design director of design technology, will talk a little bit more about her process.
Yeah, so I think, he's already mentioned a little bit of our process. We've moved from a sketch-based, section-based, plan-based type of thinking process to a fully three-dimensional process. So we start very much at the beginning in 3 dimension. And so the process altogether is kind of hovering over this kind of central modeling systems that we have. And each iteration of our model is done quickly. There's many of them. And the way we break down basically the making of architecture is through a systematic organization of performance-driven elements. Some are formal, some are not formal, some are quantifiable, some are not so much. And we've developed a really kind of sophisticated way of organizing this system and colliding them together. So if you think about it physically, and this is one of the purest iteration that we have of that, you could say, let's smash two spheres together, and what happens, right? And in the past, you would potentially spend a week trying to recalculate the change and the Boolean operation that occurs. But today, this operation can happen in milliseconds, and we can have 1,000 sphere modification happening quite quickly. So the kind of the workforce that is used for the creation of that one object has now moved towards a more intellectual kind of position, and now the object that you have is one of many, right? So ultimately, the architecture that you see that's out in the world that we physically made is one option out of many options. And what we try to do, especially in this building, is also rethink a little bit the experience of the architecture itself, playing with perception, light, body movements, circulation path, the kind of connection between inside and outside, what is building, what is landscape, and really kind of manipulate these things. And because we have a little bit more power in terms of how we modulate and how we control these things, we're really able to, throughout the design process, define these moments and define these experiences in a very, very sophisticated way. And so at the end, we're a little bit more in control of what is happening. This drawing is literally a plan that has been kind of stylized a little bit, but it does kind of connect a little bit to the installation that we're showing you today, where everything is connected. The artistry, the craftsmanship, the performance requirement, we have gravity, and we have, it has to be a shelter for human beings. So there are some requirements that are very much tangible, but ultimately at the same time, it's also an exercise of living and experiencing the work. We work very much as a collective, so it's a bunch of different people with different experiences, different expertise. There's a loop that happens. I mean, we bought our 3D printers in 1999, so it's quite a long time. So we've had the time to really integrate these things in a workflow, and making a model versus thinking a model or building something is interconnected. Sometimes we work in a variety of software. We need to build in parametric information back in 3D Experience, for example. So we built also these little tools that allow us to quickly move from one software to the other. We need that flexibility, right? Because we're creators, and one person may be more comfortable in one place or another, and our job is to make that as seamless as possible, to not kind of prevent ourselves from exploring different avenues. This is a transition under construction in Vigo, Spain, for TGVs. And this is just a very simple example of how we're using the platform as a design tool. And you can see the lines in the background are very much our integrated grid systems, and the kind of like the boundaries, the roles, where you need to be. And the design itself will be then occurring throughout as a loop. And it goes, you can see sometimes it disappears, sometimes it comes back, and it's very much about the process with the client, the engineers, what happens, the different phases that we go through. But ultimately, everything is part of one story. Everything exists at all times. We are not necessarily, I was mentioning, the tape thing that in the 80s, where you listen to the tape and it's song 1, song 2, you have to rewind and fast forward. In our case, we're talking more about a global kind of agglomeration of different things that exist all at the same time, and that you can pick and choose and go back and forth. This is the new Orange County Museum of Art, which is in construction document phase right now. And again, we're doing the same thing. We have a designer who's shaping the building. So in this case, Atsushi and I are optimizing the fillets and trying to make the building look the same but work better, right? And a purely geometrical exercise in this case. The model also contains innately the information that is required for your drawings. So it is part of the process, but we don't have to create it afterward. We just have that embedded within that as well. And then in this case, we use terracotta tile layout systems, and we are developing it to be, here in our case, the kind of the flow of the tile is following the geometry, right? And so you start as a horizontal pattern, and by the end, the pattern might be vertical or diagonal because it is following the geometry so that we can maintain the same tile, same size everywhere, right? So it is part of that kind of process that we do, again, due diligence to really explore a variety of options and be as creative as possible. We're also very much involved in education. So this is the AR, VR workshop for the 3D Experience seminar that we have at SciArc in downtown LA. It's a one-day seminar. In this case, the students had to create the first city on Mars. Very much conceptual, learning how to promote a vision, tell a story, using a variety of tools. Obviously, 3D Experience was the main kind of three-dimensional and visualization tool, but also 3D printing and organization, kind of just being able to, as I said, tell the story. We use a bunch of different technologies, immersive technology. This is the HoloLens. I think the next one, yeah, this one is a Magic Leap, and we had a VR experience as well. It is just, again, we think very strongly that these different modes of expression should be integrated in the process, and it's very much dominated right now by filmmaker, gamers, and storytellers, but it potentially has a good potential in architecture visualization and design as well. So we, Alessio and I, we have been running around for quite a while. So for the last 3 years, I've been looking at really starting to think about immersive technology as a way to enhance the creative process. This is a hotel room in Valls. We are designing a shower in the middle of the space, changing a little bit of the relationship of how you turn on the shower, how you occupy the space, and it's a very much an experience that must be done full scale, right to one, and be able to kind of understand where your body moves. We also put our clients and our collaborators in our spaces, and these are the CATIA design models. We are not necessarily interested in representing anything in photorealism way. We are very much combining the idea, the craft of architecture, and the concept, right? So then when you occupy that space, there's a little bit of the story that starts to seep in. And then with Alessio, we're also looking in a little bit further away, try to experiment with interactivity. Being able to kind of play in those spaces. It starts to move a little bit further away from the actual practice, but I think it's important for us to explore because we've learned so much, right? This is more of a cinematic kind of vision. It's a cool little VR experience on this one, but it's still using our architecture, but it's very much about turning the problem on its head and using kind of our creative process and what we know about spatial quality and how bodies evolve in space. Obviously, we're like potentially the best one at doing this kind of stuff. We're also doing collaborative work with different content creators, and this is actually a technology called Holodome, which is looking like an igloo. You can be more than one person in it. You can interact with it, and it's basically projecting the information 360. So it's as if you were in virtual space without actually having to put a headset on, and then you can be surrounded by friends and play together. And so we use that opportunity, obviously, to start playing with spatial quality, movement, and see a little bit how bodies are reacting to that. It's quite an interesting tool because, I mean, I'm assuming everybody's getting this, that before this technology came into play, we could not show anyone our spaces before we actually built it. But once it's built, it's built. We cannot just erase it. So I think it gives us potentially a little bit of heads up in confirming our theories, but also potentially enhancing the experience. You have it. Okay, so the next portion that I want to show is a little bit more the classic way of talking about the architecture. We're going to show you in more detail some of the facade components that we've designed in a building that is just built right now, and it's also contained in the installation and on the wall around here. It's the one and only tower in Seoul. It's from a textile company. And they came in a very strong vision about bringing together kind of a disparate series of office with people who work in the different areas. They have different types of expertise and bringing everybody together. So this is a construction site. Sustainable is a big part of what we do to make a kind of a responsible decision about putting new architecture into the world, thinking about future conditions, because these things last quite a long time. My team specializes in complex geometry, complex system, anything that requires a little bit more than the usual application. And so we, in this case, we worked on the pillows, we call them, and those are the ones that I'm going to show you in more detail today. The concrete facade. And then on the inside, you can see there's a back portion of the building that's very much regular. It's a concrete portion. Then there's an atrium in the middle that breaks the building in half. And the front portion is a steel structure, a lot more articulated. It's following a very kind of strong line between concept, how we think about that company, how we think about architecture, and how we can begin to either influence or create new sets of relationship, right? So for example, what they're putting together in their building is a disparate types of application, meaning you have artists, you have fashion designer, but you also have researcher, product designer, and everybody was working separately. And so we're bringing everybody together and we're looking at how we can use the architecture to bring these people together and kind of really promote chance encounters, social interaction, and potentially a new way of interacting with the architecture and with each other as well. So again, this is very much culture versus technology, very different kind of way of thinking, coming together in this object. So the labs in the back are inside a very kind of specific, repetitive, clean organization system. The front is the social interaction. The social space is a little bit more articulated. You can see back is concrete structure. The front is a steel structure. They're connected together by bridges that are going through the atrium. A big concept behind that was also the layering of information, the relationship. You can look over, you can visually reconnect, you can reconnect through noise, light, you can have a variety of experiences. These are some of the images from the atrium in the middle, which we also shaped and worked on the system. The atrium is using their material, their textile company. So at the same time, we're engaging the client themselves with, they are part of it. They're totally part of it. They're not just the recipient of something new. The central stair is designed as a way, like you can sit on it, right? It has stadium seating almost. So it could also have like centrally located events. And then behind and in front of that buffer, which we call the liner, this kind of curving wall, are the circulation spaces back and forth, up and down, and also, as you see right here, this kind of connectivity between the inside and the outside. And so it creates a very much like a transparency between all these things, which is quite beautiful. The pillows at the front are also creating eccentricities in the way that the light plays on the space and the way that things are evolving throughout the day. So these are some of that. The pillows are made out of fiberglass, so they're empty. There's no structure in them, right? So we've shaped them in a way that they can support. And so that's when all the kind of like performative aspect of this came into play. So I'm going to show you, so you can see here a little bit closer. So we started with 24 types, and today we have 4. So we have only 4 types of pieces, and the connections between the piece, and you see it's not perfect because we've averaged all the pieces together to create one universal connection. So we're trying to make everything look differentiated, but at the same time, underlying that is the kind of the order to chaos, right? We're obviously not going to ask someone to develop unique elements over and over again. We're going to work with them and try to find what's the best way to combine, you know, the architectural gesture, but also a performance requirement that fulfills that work. This is the chunk that we are kind of working on. Some of the ways that we've worked as well, so the facade is performing certain environmental requirements. We've tilted the actual building to help us as well. So we're articulating the building to respond to this environmental condition. And we're using those pillows as shading devices to protect from the sun when you don't want it. Very simply, obviously this is already long in the process because we've gone through a bunch of different things. When we settle on this kind of shape at first, it's the shape, but the shape is only the result of a certain set of studies, you know, solar and view. And then the shape evolves over time. And then as Eric showed you before, at one point we decided to make a mock-up because we had never done something so articulated and so organically eccentric, and I think we had not necessarily realized how big it was. So we just set out to make a little mock-up together that taught us a lot of things about the beauty of the shape, but also the size of the shape. And then there's a little bit more rigorous process that goes into in terms of, you know, is it structurally sound? Will it, since we don't want to have steel inside, this thing has to be able to sustain itself. Because it's a composite material, we can layer it thicker when we need more strength and thinner when we need less strength, right? So those things are all kind of integrated in this loop of design. We call optimization, to optimize the shape. And then we also developed these very fancy tools to help us in the pure design phase, right? So we know it's going to work technically and performatively, but there's a set of performance which is, does it look good? Does it work? Do we like it? Is it elegant? I mean, those things are very difficult to put a number to, right? It's very much about experience. And so we are also then using these tools in a way that allows us to enhance the flexibility. And as I said before, each of these models contain a variety of information that allow us to represent in a different way or use in different contexts or for different purpose. So that's kind of the big idea here. The other one is also always looking back to the user. You know, the experience of a person evolving into these buildings and how you start to kind of relate to all these objects and the kind of space that we're creating, both figuratively but also actually as a very kind of specific study of how these things are working. Now, because the geometry is quite complex, right, with double curvatures everywhere, that's the best for this thing. We give our models directly to the fabricator. They used it directly. You can see it's a monocoque structure, so they built a mold for each half of the piece and then do an effusion process for the fiberglass. There's some aramid fiber inside, which is also some of their product. And we put a metal, like a beautiful metal plate at the end to close the shell once it's been put back together. It has an additional frame in the middle picture you can see here for transport because they get very fragile if we twist them in an unexpected way. And then they get transported to the site on these big trucks. They have a little hook on the edges, and then they get just lifted through the air on the facade. You can see it right there. Very specific points of connection, very specific way of putting them up. They're very, very strong, but you have to be careful, obviously, how you handle it before you install it. The connections are basically a very simple metal plate that goes through to the mullion behind it. Very discreet. It's using gravity, and it's also a system where you can just kind of fold them back out and take take one out at a time. Or I think when you have to change one, you have to actually take two out if there's ever something that happens. So these are some of the images of the clips and the attachment plates. And these are the pieces, they're still wrapped up. And they're hanging on the facade, just very, very straight. And that's basically the process that we use for this. And again, it's an international project, so we're not in America. But I think it was a very successful collaborative process for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Corinza. Thank you, Eric. That's fascinating work. Really fascinating work. We have 5 minutes for questions, but I'm going to be selfish and ask the first one. And I'm going to ask you a personal question. It's interesting to have the three of you with three different profiles here on stage because it's going to span the work that each of you are doing. As architects, it's a complex profession. It's a complex process, and it's a very physical process in the end. You build something. It's an artifact that will live on as a monolithic thing. But the process to get there is a very fluid process where things are changing. And we've seen over the course of your work, from the very beginning now to the current day, there's an embrace of technology and a way of working with a diagram to layer information. And it's what we see with the installation here too, this layering of information to build on that diagram, to layer space in a way, to enhance an experience and to achieve at something that's dynamic, that reflects the experience of the place. And so this is a complex process that gets you from a very ephemeral, a very diagrammatic idea to a built work. And so through this process, you're dealing with originally 2D and 3D, and now you're working more in 3D, and it's going further into the immersive. How is that immersive design process changed the way you work with diagrams and changed the way that you explore data-driven design processes to get to a monolithic object, an object that doesn't change, but is still dynamic and is still layering space?
Are you talking about perception of the
experience
itself? Well, I think that we've had to learn, I would say, the hard way. Because we are very much against using, at this moment anyway, this type of visualization in any other way than as a diagram and as a kind of a design idea or design model. So we will be very careful about how far we take it, right? And what we've done, and we've done it with several people, is put them in the design model, which is kind of rough, and it's very much about the kind of underlying geometry. And we've had some interesting meetings in there because it's like, so then it's like the client would be amazed in realizing that what they have seen all these years of working with us is not actually what we are building, because the understanding of a model, of a drawing, is very different. And so there's a little bit of wonder and discovery about that. And so far it's worked in our favor, for sure. And then in our team, it's more like, okay, we need to fix this, right? So there is this aspect of the immersion that allows us to identify certain things that are still very, even though we do this all day long, we're on our computers all day long, we evolve in this 3D space, it's still a step forward for us. And I think it's opening up a whole set of possibilities. Yeah.
I know for me, for the chandelier project that I presented, we actually got the client approval through virtual reality. And so this was a process of making a study model. Tom said, well, it's not big enough. It kind of needs to be bigger. And it gets to a point where you can't build a study model. You're actually going to build the real thing. And so at that point, in order to get his wife's approval, we actually brought her into the office and put the chandelier in the space in virtual reality and put her in the headset so she could see it. And that was the ticket. At that point, we built the final thing.
And talking about immersive reality, I see it also not just a visualization tool, because I think you can do much more things with it, and it's called immersive because it's immersing yourself into it. So I think that as working this time with Corinza, we speculate a lot about what you can do in the space. And since we are here and we are collaborating with 3D experience was the experience inside of the virtual space. So what if this virtual space become a collaborative space where many people are inside and they are working toward the same direction? So it becomes almost like anti-hierarchy between client and designer sometimes, because both are there and both are very good feedbacks. Yeah.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the audience?
I never have any questions.
Never happens?
No.
Then I'm going to ask one more question. Cristiano's got a question.
Good morning. Very, very impressive. I'm really pleased to see this. I have a question. You talked about the performative and about capturing performance in a model, and you talk a lot about performance analysis. And I was wondering, there's another aspect of performance which you showed, an FRP facade. How do you capture, for example, fire rating performance in something like that? Because FRP is a very controversial material to use on a facade. In some countries it's allowed, in some countries it's not. How do you actually implement that level of performance in a model so that you can manage risk when you're working with your clients?
I think at the end of the day, you are completely correct. In the US, that would not have been allowed. And in Korea, we are able to do it only by talking to boat builders and car makers from other industries, and understanding the type of paint and layering they put on it. So ultimately, the shape of the piece was not in the conversation so much as the finish in our case. So it didn't interfere too much. We just needed to make sure, make due diligence for, I mean, we also have open windows. So we need to make sure that the fumes are not going inside the building, that everything is kind of happening in a kind of smooth way if there's ever something going on in the building. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but in those terms, it wasn't. Once we got the okay, we understood what the parameters were. It just went really, really smoothly.
Was there any testing to further up on that question? Was there any specific fire testing that had to go into that process to make it pass code?
Only simulation about smoke evac, right? The actual finish is a very standard finish that they use a lot over there. So they already have enough information on that. It's about building shape. How many pieces do we have? Where are the windows opening? And more along that line, access for firefighters. And those simulation curves are just kind of generic type of simulation that are done on every project, pretty basically.
I have one final question. This was my subjective question. And that is, you work a lot in the virtual. You work a lot in the real. We have a very virtual and real installation here. What do you prefer? What do you prefer? Do you prefer the virtual design or the real built work in the end?
I think the real built work is always where you learn something. You can prototype in the computer, you can do performance evaluation, you can use science to measure many different parts of building components or buildings functioning as systems. You know, there's no shortage of scientists that will be eager to analyze any part of the building. And so I don't think that's where the learning happens. I think the learning happens in the physical testing, and also when we make design decisions that we don't fully understand, you see it play out in the real world. You see the circumstances that you may not have anticipated play out positively or negatively, and those are the experiences that you learn from. And so I think for me, it's the real.
Well, I only disagree if you look forward to the future. Because I think that we're getting so much better. The technology is moving fast. And I think in a very near future, you will be able to test these things virtually. And it's going to be a seamless transition between these two things. And I mean, I'm hopeful that that's going to happen in the next 2 or 3 years, actually. So I would say there's a craft about tactile. We are humans, so we like to touch things and feel things physically. So that's more of an emotional connection. But I think in terms of testing space and understanding human experience within these new things that have not been built, we're getting really, really good at simulating that. And I have no doubts that we will be able to get there without actually having the physical portion.
I'm in the middle between virtual and physical here. But yeah, I think looking at the future, I can say that the gap between the two is getting closer and closer. So it's going to be complementary in a certain way, some way. Yeah.
Good answer. We've got we've got the full spectrum here then. So thank you. If there's no more questions, we'll close. Thank you very much for your time.